Thank you so much. It is an honor to be here today. And woo, it's always so hard to follow something like that. For me, it's much easier for me to tell the story, as painful as that is. But this is my adopted family. We talked about relationships earlier and how important that is. But I have been blessed to, as I say, adopt or inherit an amazing group of men. And Jocko is one of those. And so when I hear them share and I hear them speak, knowing the pain they carry, knowing the loss for them. My son tried to explain to me before he passed the brotherhood. I'm like, I get it. You've trained hard with them. You've gone in deployments, I get that. But as close as your brother that you grew up with for 28 years? He said, yeah, Mom, that close. I'm like, let me remind you, I didn't birth them. They really can't be your brothers. And we left it at that. And the week that he died, I had 5 of them in my home. Not the teammates on Charlie Platoon, but 5 of his brothers in the SEAL teams that he was close to. And I realized, oh my gosh, they love Mark as much as we do. And they're hurting just as much as we are. And if you're a parent, you can imagine that's our worst nightmare, to ever think about losing our child. I've been a widow for 31 years, and so I'd walked through death before, but I can tell you, it's true. The toughest thing you could go through is losing your child. After my husband passed, I wrote in my journal 2 weeks later, why am I still crying? Why have things not gone back to normal? What's wrong with me? I had no idea what grief was like, because it takes more than that time to go through. But I started reading books, and I read book after book after book. And they say the toughest death that you could go through is the instant death of your child. And on August 2nd, we found that to be true. I was at my Bible study at my small group that night, and we had gathered for my birthday. My birthday was the Wednesday before, but we hadn't met. And so we had gathered together, and that night, after we had our meeting, they presented me with the willow tree angel. And many of you are familiar. Those are the collector. They look like they're wood, but I don't think they're made out of wood. But they all have wire wings, and each one's a different character quality. And my girlfriend, after we had our meeting, gave that to me, and she said, you remind me of such a woman of courage, all that you've been through in your life. And yet you're still positive. You still love God. You still serve Him. And little did we know how much more courage was going to be required. My son called me, my oldest son, Christopher, and he said, hey, Mom, where are you? Nothing in his voice to alert me. He wasn't talking too fast. He wasn't crying. He wasn't freaked out. And I said, well, it's Wednesday night. I'm at small group. Why? What's up? And he said, how long will it take you to get home? And I thought, that's kind of an odd question. I don't know, 5 minutes, 7 minutes? Why? What's up? And he said, you just need to come home. Mark visited us before he deployed, and we had a great time. It was his birthday. I took him to a game and had on the marker board put up, happy safe deployment, love you, happy 28th birthday. And as he left, my oldest son, Christopher, and I were standing on the lawn. And as he pulled away, I said, I don't feel good about this. I'm not a worrier. I'm not a fretter. That is just not in my personality. And my son is a lot like me, and he said, neither do I, Mom. Of course, didn't think too much more about it. It wasn't like every day when a black car drove down the street, I'd be like, oh, is today the day? I prayed for that kid more than I prayed for anything in my life. And yet when we got the call, when I got in the car to drive home, I knew what laid ahead for me. And there was a song from my past that I sang. And it said, I put my hope in you, O Lord, trusting you, I will not be shaken. Knowing that you will see me through, I put my hope in you. And I just sang that over and over and over and over. And I got to the intersection by my house, and there was probably 3 or 4 fire trucks and several ambulances and police cars. That whole intersection was shut down. And as I pulled up on that intersection, I thought, my house blew up. That's all that's wrong. And trust me, I would much rather have lost all my earthly possessions and still had Mark. To this day, I can't tell you how I got through that intersection or how I found myself back in my subdivision. But when I got in there were no more emergency vehicles. And I got ready to turn the corner by my house, expecting a black car to be parked out front. I turned that corner, there was no black car. Just my son on the sidewalk, pacing back and forth. And they had tried to find me earlier that day. I used to live in Oregon. I moved down to Arizona. I know Mark filed the paperwork and gave the new address. But again, another time I see God's handiwork. If they'd have found me that morning when Mark actually had passed, I would have been by myself. Up in Oregon, they waited, they knocked on neighbors' doors, finally got a hold of a neighbor and said, she doesn't even live here anymore, she lives down in Arizona. At this point, they're afraid I'm gonna find out on the nightly news. So they called the local CAICO officer to come notify me. Usually in the SEAL community, we have a SEAL group that comes. And as I pulled up there, parked along the sidewalk, and saw my son, and he said, Mom, the Navy's here. And if you're a military family, you know that when they come to your house, it's not good news. If Mark would have been injured, they'd have got us to him. And I remember falling on his shoulder and just crying, no, no. And they had been looking for me for several hours already in Arizona. Couldn't find me. I guess I could be hard to find at times. But they knew talked to my neighbor. She said her son works at Lowe's. I don't have her cell phone. And so they had got a hold of my son and come home. So they'd been in my home for a while, and they said, we could tell by being in your home that you're a woman of faith. You're going to need to rely on that faith for what we're about to tell you. Your son, Mark Allen Lee, has been killed in action. And it's been 19 years. And not once when I've shared this story does it ever get easy. It takes courage. It's hard to do that. But just like they talked earlier about extreme ownership and owning the circumstances, this isn't something that was my fault. I had no control over it. But I did have a choice how I responded. And so as we spoke that night and tried to understand what had happened and what the next steps were and process through it, I had a small window next to my door, and when I left my small group, I said, something's wrong, please be praying. And I looked outside and I saw them all standing outside, and I'm like, what are you doing out there? Get in here. I need you in here. And so they came in and we talked, we prayed, we cried. We tried to process what we just heard. And you heard in the video from Jocko that once the guys knew that I'd been notified, I started to get calls from them. And I remember thinking before I talked to them, oh my gosh, I'm mush. I can't make a decision. I can't focus on anything. How are Mark's teammates in the combat zone going to be safe? How are they going to continue on? How are they going to finish their mission? And so when I got those calls, that's where my heart was. I'm like, how are you? I'm praying for you. What do you need? How can I support you? I wasn't facing life or death situations in my circumstances, but they were. And we began to build those relationships, and after I got off the phone with them, my friends had left for my small group. It was probably close to midnight. And my son, Christopher, who served in the Marines, was there. He met his wife in Okinawa. And she used to go home before they had their 5 children. She used to go home every year for 6 weeks. That same previous year, my daughter had miscarried at 5 months and my daughter-in-law at 5.5 months. And she just got pregnant. They both were just pregnant. And he decided he wasn't going to tell her that he knew she'd be home in time for the funeral, but he didn't want to risk losing another child. And again, talk about courage. How could you do that as a brother who just lost his brother and not tell your wife and have conversations every day? But that was courage that he displayed. And that night he came up to me and he said, Mom, I'm going to go lay down. I'm going to try to get some sleep. I'm going to stay here tonight. I'm like, thank you, son. And he went in, and I knew there was no way that sleep was going to come to me that night. And as I mentioned, I've been a widow for 31 years. It was 12 years at that point. And I just wanted somebody to hold me and tell me it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. And there wasn't anybody there. But I'd seen God walk me through death before, and I knew where my strength was going to come from. And I went and grabbed my Bible. And I opened my Bible, and it opened literally to Psalms 27, which says, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked came against me to eat up my flesh, my enemies and my foes, they stumbled and they fell. Though an army may encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war may rise against me. And I'm reading this thinking, okay, God, did you just insert this today? Because this could not have been more appropriate for my circumstances. And the second to last verse said, I would have lost hope if I had not believed in the courage of the... I would have lost hope if I did not believe... Oh boy, now I've got it messed up. But it ends with, have courage. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and I will strengthen your heart. Wait on the Lord. And we had that courage angel at the beginning of the night. And now I've got courage again. God's reminding me of that. We started to piece together the heroic story of Mark, his final actions. It was 115, 120 degrees in Ramadi, Iraq that day. I've been over to Iraq twice. I'm the first Gold Star mom in history to be in the combat zone. I live in Arizona. Sometimes we see the 115, 120 degrees. But I can tell you, I was wearing body armor, but I wasn't carrying a gun. There were no bullets whizzing by me. So to try to understand how they did that in extreme temperatures, they'd been on the rooftop fighting for 2 hours, the worst battle in Ramadi up to that point. Mark carried the big gun, so he carried anywhere from 150 to 180 pounds in addition to his own weight. I don't get that. I don't understand. These guys are superhuman, I think, at times. But you saw in the movie American Sniper part of that scene where Ryan's on the rooftop and he gets shot. The bullets hit his weapon. He had severe shrapnel injuries to the head. He dropped to the ground. There were 4 of the SEALs on the rooftop. 2 of them quickly dropped. Mark could have made that very same choice that day. But his choice was to stand up in the direct line of fire, right where Ryan had just got shot. They didn't have a medic up there. They knew they needed to get a medic up there immediately. So he made that choice to stand up in the direct line of fire, providing that cover so they could move the medic up to the rooftop. He got up there and took one look at Ryan and said, we got to get him out of here immediately, or there's no chance for survival. So a second time, Mark made that choice again to stand up into that line of fire, hoping to provide that cover so they could all get down off the rooftop. They sent Ryan off for medical attention, and they climbed in their Bradleys, and they're headed back to the base, which I'm proud to tell you was named Camp Mark Lee in his memory. I got to visit Camp Mark Lee in 2007. I got to walk where he walked and see where he slept. It was still pretty dangerous, so I didn't go out patrolling Ramadi, but I did in Baghdad. And as they got back to the base, I know Chris Kyle told me later they were pretty sure there's no way Ryan could have survived his injuries. Ryan actually survived 3 more years, lived here in Arizona, got married, was expecting a little girl, got in for surgery, I think his 23rd surgery, and died from complications in that surgery, but he survived that day and had 3 more years of life. And while they were trying to process that, the chief came in and said, we just found 30 of the insurgents that just attacked us. And without hesitation, Mark looked at his chief and he said, roger that, let's go get them. They had done their mission for the day. Because I've been over there, I know there's a big Marine base on the other side. If it had been me, I'd have said, go get some of the Marines that are fresh and haven't been out in battle today and are gung-ho ready to go. But that's not who these guys are. So they climbed in their Bradleys, and they headed back into Ramadi. They cleared several houses, went in the last house they'd be in, cleared the bottom of the house, and Mark started up the steps, and they heard him yell, "On me!" And he was saying, "I got the lead on this. You guys follow me. We got a bigger mission to do together." And as they started up those steps, they drew fire through a window. And for the last and final time, Mark made that choice again to stand into the line of fire. He could have ducked below the wall. He probably would have lost half his platoon, but he made that choice to stand up in the line of fire to save his teammates. And that trickles down to you and I. The freedoms that we get to enjoy every day, the freedoms that we have to gather here today, those are paid for by a dear price. And as I mentioned before, while I had no choice, the news that was given to me, I did have a choice how I responded. And my choice was to put on his boots and pick up his weapon and stay in the fight, figuratively speaking. And making sure that our men and women have everything they need that are serving, that our veterans who get out are taken care of with, we provide hyperbaric oxygen therapy, hormone and supplement therapy, natural things that are healing them. And that other Gold Star families, we walk alongside them and host retreats, and we have a house here in Arizona, one in Florida, where they can come stay for free. And we started America's Mighty Warriors to do those things. Mark's name meant Mighty Warrior. And I'm sure that each one of you would agree, he definitely lived up to his name. And we heard Jocko talk about Mark, that he represented love, faith, and courage. And that's something that we all need to do. We each can be women of courage. I think we face so many things in life. We go through struggles in our relationships, with our health, with our finances. And yet we all have a choice how we respond. As I was thinking through the theme of courage, which is what I've written about and talked about for 19 years, I didn't go to special classes to learn how to have courage. I don't have a degree in courage. It's not something that's a skill that we're trained for. It is a choice that we make. And so I think in the circumstances you're going through, whatever those are, we can choose courage. And just as I mentioned, and Jocko mentioned as well, that I asked them, how are you? What do you need? How can we help you? And that's what we're here for this week, to make sure, these 2 days, to make sure that we have those tools for you, to equip you to be women of courage. And one of the things that I tell people all the time, it's your GPS. Wake up in the morning, find one thing before your feet even hit the ground to be grateful for. I remember after Mark died and God kind of prompted me to do that, I'm like, seriously, what do I have to be grateful for? Are you kidding me? I've lost my son. And I've never audibly heard him, but in my thoughts, he's like, do you have hot water in your shower? I'm like, well, duh, I live in America. Of course I have hot water in my shower. He goes, well, a lot of our troops that aren't on a base don't even, I'm like, oh, sorry, God, forgive me, yes. And so I started that habit of doing that every day. One thing that's specific to be grateful for. And then I encourage people, go do something physical. When you're struggling, when you're feeling discouraged, depressed, when you do these things, it makes a difference. There's a feel-good endorphin that's released. And I started with walking to the end of my driveway. Ladies, I can't tell you how deep the despair was for me in the beginning of not wanting to even get out of bed. So to think I'm going to walk to the end of my driveway, you might as well have asked me to run a marathon. And I walked to the end of the driveway, and I'm competitive, so the next day I'm like, okay, walk to the end of the block. Granted, it was only 2 houses over, so not, again, a big feat. To the point of I walk 5 miles at least every day, and have for probably 6 or 7 years. It's just a faithful discipline that I do. And there's a feel-good endorphin that's relief. They've started doing more research. I used to just say that, but there's research that backs that up. And then go serve somebody else. You don't have to start a foundation like I did with America's Mighty Warriors, but when you're hurting, go do something for someone else. Whether it's walk the neighbor's dog, go read books at the library. It makes a huge difference when we do those things. And then I want to end with the 10 choices of courage. And as I mentioned before, courage, it takes courage to choose your response and how you respond. And you may not have a choice in what happens to you, but you always have a choice how you respond. Courage begins the moment you decide not to let the circumstances define you. 2, courage to move forward and live with hope. That was that reminder in that last verse. I would have lost hope if I had not believed I'd see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And so you have that hope. You continue to move on. Number 3, courage to grow, learn, and thrive, not just survive. I hate it when people are like, oh, you're a survivor. There was a poster back when I was in high school that was a cat, and there was a wire, and his paws were like this, and his chin's like, and it said, hang in there, baby. And to me, that's surviving. You're just hanging in there. You can thrive in the midst of that. And survival is an instinct, but courage pushes us beyond survival into growth. Every challenge can either shrink us or shape us into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. 4, courage to live your life worthy of their sacrifice. And that's how I autograph my books. That my son made that choice, like so many others, to give their lives. But we have a responsibility to live our lives worthy of that sacrifice. We can live live a life that honors them and reflects those who gave their last breath. Courage to forgive. And it's been very tragic what we've seen with the loss of Charlie Kirk, but man, did we see that so boldly at his funeral service when his wife just days later made that choice to forgive. I was prompted, my husband actually took his life, and after he did that, we were at a conference, and they started talking about widows and orphans. I'm like, oh, great. I'm one of them. I'm 39. I'm a widow. And I ran out of the room crying, and a lady came up to me, and she's like, are you okay? I'm like, do I look like I'm okay? But it's the things that we say trying to comfort. And I said, no, I just buried my husband this morning. And she said, oh, was he sick? I'm like, no, he took his own life. And she said, you're going to need to forgive him. I'm like, seriously? Okay, God, you prompted me that at the funeral. I said, give me 6 months to be mad. And now, okay. And she said, not with your feelings, but with your will, make that choice. You know that Erica Kirk's feelings were not there when she made that choice to forgive that man just days later who took her husband. It takes courage to forgive. It takes courage to accept the truth and the reality. It takes courage to face that truth of loss, of mistakes, of things we cannot change. But in accepting reality, we also open the door to healing and transformation. Number 7, courage to serve others. We talked about that a little bit. True courage is not about self-preservation, but about giving of yourself, serving others, especially when you are wounded yourself, takes immense strength and humility. Number 8, courage to have a thankful heart. Again, these are choices that we make every time. Gratitude shifts our perspective from what we've lost to what we still have. Choosing thankfulness in the middle of trials is one of the bravest decisions we can make. And so that's for me with Mark. It's easy to go back and say, oh, how many kids would he had? What would he be doing now? I missed this opportunity. He's not there on Mother's Day. Do those things obviously come to my mind? Yes, but I don't stay focused on those. I look at the blessings that I do have in life. Number 9, courage to trust God in everything. When nothing makes sense, when the pain feels unbearable, courage is trusting the one who knows the end from the beginning. Faith fuels courage, and courage fuels faith. And the last one, courage to step into the unknown. And ladies, I would challenge you to have that mantra, to be a woman of courage and step into the unknown. And then I always challenge people, go make your mark. He definitely has made his mark in this world. And it's pretty amazing, 19 years later, to see the impact that kid is still making in such a crazy way. And as I mentioned before, it'd be easy to look back and say what's missing, but it's like, look at the changes. I get to feel his presence. That young man believed Jesus Christ was Lord and Savior, and I will see him again one day. But until then, I choose to continue making my mark in the world. And I want to leave you just with that thought, to be a woman of courage and go make your mark.